At my daughter's wedding, her husband called me a worthless old cook. I'm Elias Thorne, and I'd stayed quiet for 2 years. What Julian Croft, the rising star venture capitalist, didn't know was that his fancy firm, Kestrel Capital, earned $8.7 million in management fees from me every year. He didn't know I owned 80% of Ethelred Systems, the $14 billion AI unicorn his firm had built its reputation on. Tonight, his arrogance would cost him everything. Because when you humiliate a billionaire who's been hiding in plain sight, the consequences come with compound interest. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single document. My hands didn't shake. My voice stayed level. But the paper I held would end his career in 72 hours. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look or your job? Here's how a quiet immigrant taught an entitled venture capitalist that respect isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn and lose. Just before you continue to watch, Joe would like you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage him to keep his streak of thrilling revenge stories for you to watch. All right, back to the story. 2 years ago, when my daughter Elena brought Julian home for the first time, I knew we had a problem. He walked into our modest 3-bedroom house in Daly City, and I watched his eyes do a quick scan. The worn leather couch I'd had for 15 years, the small TV, the family photos showing me in my diner uniform, flour on my apron. "So, Mr. Thorne," he said, settling into our recliner like he was interviewing me, "Elena tells me you're retired from food service." The way he said food service made it sound like a disease. "Ran a diner for 35 years, I replied. "Good, honest work." Julian nodded with that smile people use when they're trying to be polite about something they find disappointing. "That's admirable. The service industry is so important for society." Elena shot me a look. She knew that tone. Over the next 2 years, the comments got more frequent. At family dinners, Julian would steer conversations away from my stories about the diner. When I mentioned fixing the old espresso machine, he'd joke about blue-collar solutions. When Elena's friends visited, he'd introduce me as Elena's dad, who ran a diner. Never Elias, never by name. The worst part, Elena started doing it too. "Dad, Julian's partners are coming to dinner," she'd say. "Maybe wear the blue shirt instead of the flannel." "Don't mention the early coding projects," she'd add quietly. "They might not understand." What she didn't know was that those coding projects had grown into something much bigger. While I was flipping burgers by day, I was building an AI kernel in my garage by night. At their engagement party last spring, Julian gave a speech to his Kestrel Capital colleagues about marrying into a humble working-class family. He talked about how it would ground him. 200 people applauded while I stood there holding my beer, feeling like a museum exhibit. "My father-in-law taught me that honest work comes in many forms," Julian said, raising his glass toward me, "even if it's not in a boardroom." The laughter was polite but pointed. I could have spoken up then. I could have shown him the shareholder certificates in my home office, the Forbes article from 2018 that called me Silicon Valley's ghost, the reclusive founder of Ethelred. But I didn't. Why? Because Elena loved him. Because she was happy. When I came to America from Greece in 1980, I had $340 in my pocket and a thick accent. I'd learned to stay quiet, work hard, and let my results speak for themselves. For 40 years, that strategy had served me well. But tonight, at the Ritz-Carlton, surrounded by 180 wedding guests, Julian Croft was about to learn the difference between staying quiet by choice and staying quiet because you're weak. The reception was in full swing. I'd paid for the wedding, all $200,000 of it. Julian's parents had contributed exactly nothing. But as I watched Julian work the room, I heard the same pattern. "This is my wife, Elena. She comes from a modest background, but she's incredibly driven. Elena's father is a simple man, salt-of-the-earth type. Each introduction made my chest tighter, because what Julian Croft didn't know was that the quiet man in the corner nursing his whiskey owned the company that was his career. As I stood at the bar watching Julian introduce Elena to his managing partner, Cynthia Vance, I faced a choice. Stay quiet, and Julian would diminish me for years. My grandchildren would grow up thinking their grandfather was just the cook. But speak up, and I'd risk destroying Elena's marriage on her wedding night. The stakes were clear. Elena worked at Salesforce, building a solid reputation. But she was married to a man who introduced her like a charity case he'd rescued. If I stayed silent, that narrative would become permanent. And Elena, gradually, would start to believe it. My daughter was disappearing into Julian's version of her story. On the other hand, revealing the truth would shatter Julian's identity. His colleagues would discover that the humble cook he'd been condescending to was their firm's single largest client. It would humiliate him, and Elena might never forgive me. I thought about my wife, Athena, who'd passed 5 years ago. She'd managed the diner's books while I coded. Let Elena have a normal childhood, Athena had said. Let her earn her own respect. We'd driven 10-year-old Hondas while owning $10 billion in private stock. We'd lived modestly while building an empire. But Athena had also said something else. If anyone ever treats our family with genuine disrespect, Elias, you show them exactly who they're dealing with. Tonight, Julian had crossed that line. Staying quiet wasn't protecting Elena anymore. It was enabling him. I finished my whiskey and walked toward my briefcase. Inside were documents that would change everything. The moment came during the cocktail hour. Julian was holding court with 5 of his Kestrel Capital colleagues. I approached their circle, briefcase in hand. "Dad," Elena said, appearing at my elbow, "Julian's just talking shop with his team." "That's fine," I said. "I'd like to introduce myself properly." Julian's laugh was nervous. "Actually, Elias, we're discussing some pretty complex AI valuations. Might be a bit over your head." His colleague smiled politely. Cynthia Vance glanced at her watch. "Try me," I said. "Dad, please," Elena whispered. Julian's smile widened. He was enjoying this. "Okay, we're structuring a $4 billion Series C funding round for Ethelred Systems. Very technical stuff." "Interesting," I said. "What's the valuation based on? Their current SaaS revenue?" The smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "Their SaaS revenue is a trailing indicator," I said. "The real value is in the new K7 kernel. What are its regression testing metrics?" One of his colleagues, a younger analyst, looked impressed. "Around 98.7% efficiency." "That's decent for an AI," I said. "But is that on a closed data set or open-world simulation?" Julian's jaw tightened. "Mixed portfolio, mostly closed." "I know that kernel pretty well," I nodded. "Really?" Julian's voice carried an edge. "And how exactly would a diner cook know AI kernel metrics?" The circle went quiet. "You'd be surprised what you pick up," I said. Julian turned to his colleagues. "Isn't this fascinating? Elias here thinks he understands our business better than we do." Cynthia looked uncomfortable. "No, this is great," Julian continued. "Elias, since you're such an expert, maybe you should give us investment advice. Tell us which AI companies we should be funding." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a simple white business card. "You might want to focus on the Ethelred Systems portfolio." Julian took the card without looking at it. "Ethelred Systems? Never heard of them. Wait." He glanced down at the card for the first time. His expression changed as he read it. "Elias Thorne, founder, Ethelred Systems LLC." The color drained from his face. "Wait," he said slowly. This is your company?" "That's right." "But he looked at his colleagues. "You're a cook." "I was, for 35 years. Then I founded Ethel in my garage in 1998. Cynthia Vance stepped forward. "Mr. Thorne, did you say Ethelred Systems?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked at Julian, then at me. We've been trying to get a meeting with the founder of Ethelred for 6 months. He's our firm's largest client." Julian's hand was trembling. "This is impossible." "What's impossible?" I asked. "You can't own Ethelred. They're worth about $14 billion. Last appraisal," I agreed. "Dad," Elena's voice was a whisper, "is this real?" "Very real." Julian was staring at the card. "But why? Why didn't you ever—" "Never came up." "Never came up?" His voice cracked. "You let me think you were just a what, Julian?" I asked. He looked at his colleagues, who were now studying him with professional curiosity. "I don't understand," Julian said weakly. "It's simple," I replied. "You assumed. I didn't correct you. But the house, the clothes, the truck. I like my house. My clothes are comfortable. The truck runs fine." Elena was staring at me. "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" "Your mother and I wanted you to build your own life, make your own way." Cynthia Vance extended her hand. "Mr. Thorne, I'm Cynthia Vance, managing partner at Kestrel Capital. I believe we manage some investment accounts for Ethelred Systems." "That's right, about $1.4 billion in liquid assets." Julian looked like he might faint. The first round was over. 20 minutes later, Julian pulled me aside. His confidence was returning. He'd had time to think. "Elias, I need to understand. This business card, I've never seen your name in TechCrunch, never in Wired." "I keep a low profile." "Nobody keeps this low a profile." His voice was gaining strength. "A 14 billion company doesn't just hide. I see what's happening. You saw that Forbes article about the Silicon Valley ghost. You had this card made. You're playing some elaborate joke." "Why would I do that, Julian?" "Because you're embarrassed. Because you want to impress my colleagues. Because you can't stand that I'm successful and you're not." "Julian," my voice stayed level, "what's your firm's management fee on my account?" "What? Your account?" "The Ethelred account. What's the fee?" "It's 2%. 2% of $1.4 billion is $28 million a year," I said. "Your personal commission on that account, which I approved, was $1.2 million last year. Prime numbers." Julian frowned. "How could you possibly know my commission?" "Lucky guess," I said. "The contract runs through December 2026. Your firm holds 40% of its assets in Ethelred stock, 30% in bonds, and 30% in emerging tech." Julian's face went pale again. "How do you?" "Client management is detail work." "But you'd have to be—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Meanwhile, Elena had approached with Cynthia. "Dad, Cynthia was just telling me about Ethelred Systems." Cynthia smiled. "Mr. Thorne, I hope you don't mind, but I called our office to pull your account information." Julian straightened. Here it was, the proof. "Our wealth management division handles $1.4 billion in liquid assets for Ethelred Systems, LLC. The account was opened in September 2019, signed by Elias Thorne." Julian's mouth fell open. "We've been hoping to expand that relationship," Cynthia said. "Ethelred has been one of our most sophisticated clients." "You're serious?" Julian whispered. "Completely serious." Cynthia looked confused. "Julian, you told me Elena's family was from a modest background." Julian's eyes darted between us. "I need some air," he said. But as he started to walk away, Cynthia called after him. "Julian, wait, there's something else you should know." He stopped. "Your promotion to junior partner, it was contingent on re-signing the Ethelred account." Julian turned slowly. Cynthia looked at me, then back at Julian. "Ethelred Systems is our largest client, Julian. Mr. Thorne has been your boss, in effect, for 2 years." The blood drained completely from Julian's face. He sat down heavily. This wasn't happening, but it was, and it was about to get much worse. The moment I knew there was no going back came during the toasts. Julian had retreated to the bar, and he'd started drinking heavily. By dinner, his judgment was gone. He stood up, tapping his knife against his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his words slurring, "I want to talk about family tonight." I felt a knot forming in my stomach. When I met Elena 2 years ago, I was struck by her determination to rise above her circumstances. He gestured to our table. She comes from humble beginnings, working-class family, blue-collar background. A few guests nodded. Her father, Elias Thorne, represents everything that's honest and simple. He worked with his hands for 35 years, food service. Julian's smile was condescending. "Now, Elias has some interesting stories about business and tech, don't you, Elias?" All eyes turned to me. I said nothing. "In fact," Julian continued, "Elias here was just telling my colleagues about some AI company he supposedly owns. Ethelred Systems, I think it was." A murmur went through the crowd. Cynthia Vance looked uncomfortable. "Now, I want to be clear. There's nothing wrong with having big dreams. But sometimes," his tone was openly mocking, "when people feel insecure, they tell stories. They create fantasies about secret wealth." "Julian, stop!" Elena stood up. "No, honey, this is important," he waved her off. "Because respect has to be earned, and you don't earn it by pretending to be something you're not. Elias Thorne is a good man, a simple man, but he's not a tech mogul. He's not a secret billionaire. He's just a retired cook who wants to feel important at his daughter's wedding." The cruel laughter was scattered but audible. "And that's okay," Julian continued. "We can't all be successful in business. Some of us are meant to work with our hands, and some of us are meant to work with our minds." I watched my daughter's face crumble. "So, let's toast to honesty," Julian said, "to knowing our place in the world." "Julian, why don't you stand up?" he slurred at me. "Let everyone see the real patriarch of the Thorne family." That's when I stood. The ballroom fell silent. I walked slowly to the microphone, my briefcase in hand. Julian stepped aside with a smug smile. "Julian makes some interesting points," I said quietly, "about honesty, about knowing your place." Julian nodded approvingly. "He's right that respect has to be earned," I continued. "And he's right that some people work with their hands while others work with their minds. What Julian doesn't know," I said, opening my briefcase, "is that the best business people do both." I pulled out a manila folder. These are the original 1998 incorporation documents for Ethelred Systems. Founder, Elias Thorne. The silence was complete. Total portfolio value, according to the most recent appraisal, $14.2 billion. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Julian is correct. I did work in food service for 35 years. I learned every aspect of that business from the ground up. And then I started building the company that pays his commission. I pulled out another document. This is the wealth management agreement between Kestrel Capital and Ethelred Systems. Cynthia Vance nodded slowly. Annual management fee, $28 million. Paid by Ethelred Systems LLC to Kestrel Capital. Account manager, Julian Croft. The crowd was still. So Julian is absolutely right. We should know our place in the world. I looked directly at him. Your place is in my portfolio, earning a commission from my company for the past 2 years. Julian's champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. The silence lasted 7 seconds. Then Cynthia Vance started laughing. The laughter of someone who suddenly understood a joke 2 years in the making. "Oh my God," she said. "Julian, you've been condescending to our biggest client." "What?" he whispered. Cynthia stood up and walked to me, extending her hand. "Mr. Thorne, I owe you an apology." She turned to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Cynthia Vance, managing partner at Kestrel Capital. I've had the privilege of managing Mr. Thorne's investment portfolio for 5 years. Mr. Elias Thorne is one of Silicon Valley's most successful private tech founders. His company, Athelred, is the backbone of half the AI startups in the country. The crowd was hanging on every word. Mr. Thorne is, by any measure, one of this state's most successful businessmen. Julian was gripping the table. He's also, Cynthia continued with a slight smile, Julian's largest client. The murmur started. The quiet man in the corner wasn't a simple cook. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out another document. This is a Forbes article from September 2018. Silicon Valley's Ghost, the billionaire you've never heard of. I held up the magazine page. Elena was staring at it like she was seeing a ghost. The article estimated my net worth at $10 billion. The actual number is now $14.2 billion. Julian made a sound between a groan and a whimper. Now, I said, Julian was absolutely right about something. Respect does have to be earned. The question is, what happens when someone shows profound disrespect to the person who's been quietly earning it for 40 years? For 2 years, I continued, I've listened to Julian explain that Elena comes from a modest background. I've watched him apologize for my presence. I stayed quiet because I wanted Elena to build her own life. Elena was crying now. Instead, Julian used my silence as permission to diminish everything I'd built. I pulled out one final document. This is the software license for the booking system at the Ritz-Carlton, this hotel. I held it up. Powered by Athelred systems since 2021. Several guests gasped. So Julian gave his speech about knowing our place in a hotel running my software after spending 2 years managing my money while married to my daughter. Elias, I didn't know. Julian finally found his voice. You didn't know because you never asked, I said. You assumed. You assumed that because I ran a diner, I was uneducated. You assumed that because I drove an old truck, I was unsuccessful. You assumed that because I spoke with an accent, I was beneath you. Julian's face was white. But here's what you should have assumed, Julian. If a man can raise a daughter like Elena, if he can build a life that produces that kind of strength and intelligence, then maybe, just maybe, there's more to that man than meets the eye. The crowd erupted in applause, but I held up my hand. The tragedy here isn't that you underestimated me. The tragedy is that you've spent 2 years making my daughter apologize for where she comes from. I looked at Elena. Elena Thorne is the daughter of a self-made billionaire. She never needed you to lift her up. She was already valuable. The applause this time was thunderous. But as the crowd clapped, I watched Julian's expression change from shock to humiliation to rage. The real confrontation was just beginning. Julian's rage erupted exactly 3 minutes later. He grabbed the microphone. "This is fake!" he shouted. "Complete fake!" The crowd went silent. "You want to know the truth?" His voice was slurring. "This is all fake. Documents can be forged. This is just a pathetic old man who can't stand that his daughter married someone successful." Cynthia Wells stood up. "Julian, you need to stop." "No!" He pointed at me. "I've worked my ass off for 10 years. I'm not going to be humiliated by some immigrant cook with a briefcase full of fake papers." "Julian, stop it!" Elena stood. "You're drunk." "I'm drunk? I'm the only sober person here. You want proof he's lying? Call Kestrel Capital tomorrow. Ask to speak to Elias Thorne. See what happens." That's when Cynthia Wells walked to the head table and pulled out her phone. "Actually, Julian, I can call right now." "What?" "We have a 24-hour executive client line. I have the number because we handle his account." That doesn't prove anything." Cynthia dialed. The phone rang through the ballroom sound system. After 2 rings, a professional voice answered. Kestrel Capital, Executive Client Relations, this is Jennifer. Cynthia looked at Julian. Hi, Jennifer, this is Cynthia Vance. I'm here with Mr. Thorne at a family event. Could you confirm his identity for some guests? Of course, Miss Vance. Is Mr. Thorne available? Cynthia handed me her phone. Jennifer, this is Elias. Can you tell these folks what my position is? Certainly, Mr. Thorne. You are the founder and majority shareholder of Aethelred Systems, LLC. Would you like me to read your bio from our corporate materials? That would be helpful. Jennifer's voice filled the ballroom. Elias Thorne founded Aethelred Systems in 1998. Over 25 years, he has built the company into one of the world's largest private AI firms, encompassing 12 subsidiaries with a combined value exceeding $14 billion. Julian was staring at the phone like it was a snake. The company generates approximately $900 million in annual revenue. Mr. Thorne is considered one of America's most successful private tech founders. Thank you, Jennifer, I said, ending the call. The ballroom was silent. Julian's mouth was opening and closing. That's when I opened my briefcase one final time. Julian, I said quietly, I tried to give you a chance to apologize. Instead, you doubled down. You called me a liar. You humiliated my daughter. I pulled out a legal document. This is a notice of asset transfer. Effective immediately, Aethelred Systems is pulling all $1.4 billion in assets from Kestrel Capital. You have 72 hours to initiate the transfer. Cynthia Vance gasped. Mr. Thorne, surely we can discuss this. I'm not terminating my relationship with Kestrel Capital, I said. I'm terminating it because of Julian Croft. I pulled out another document. This is a formal complaint to Kestrel's Human Resources Department, documenting Julian's public intoxication and unprofessional conduct toward a major client. Julian tried to grab the documents. And this, I said, producing a third paper, is a letter to the SEC questioning whether someone with Julian's judgment and impulse control should maintain a financial services license. You can't do this, he whispered. I can, and I am. Cynthia was looking at Julian with undisguised disgust. Julian, you've just cost our firm its largest client because you couldn't control your mouth. But it's not fair. I didn't know. That's the point, I said. You didn't know because you didn't care enough to find out. You made assumptions based on prejudice. I handed the transfer notice to Cynthia. Miss Vance, you have 72 hours. Mr. Croft's employment status is your decision. Cynthia folded the document. It won't take 72 hours to resolve Mr. Croft's employment status. Julian looked around desperately. He found no support. Elena, he pleaded, say something. Tell them this is crazy. Elena looked at her husband with an expression I'd never seen. Cold, analytical, final. I think you've said enough for both of us. The next 72 hours unfolded exactly as I'd predicted. Monday morning, Cynthia Vance called an emergency meeting. By noon, Julian Croft's employment was terminated for conduct detrimental to client relationships. By Tuesday, the story had spread. TechCrunch ran a story. Kestrel VC fired after public confrontation with billionaire client. By Wednesday, Julian's SEC license was under review, and 3 headhunters who'd been courting him had stopped returning his calls. Elena stayed with us that first week. Why didn't you tell me? She finally asked on Thursday evening on the same back porch where she'd brought Julian for dinners. Your mother and I wanted you to be proud of what you built yourself. But he made me feel ashamed of where I came from. That wasn't about where you came from, Elena. That was about his character. She was quiet. I should have defended you. You were trying to keep peace. I understand that. But it wasn't peace. It was submission. The next week, Elena filed for an annulment. Julian's lawyer lasted exactly 2 days. The moment they saw the documentation, the wedding video, and the testimony from Cynthia Vance, they withdrew. Julian ended up demanding half of Elena's family assets. Mr. Croft, the mediator explained, The assets belong to Mr. Thorne. Your wife has no claim to her father's business." He walked away with exactly what he'd brought into it: nothing. By Christmas, Elena had left Salesforce and taken a position as head of the new Thorne Foundation, funding STEM education for first-generation Americans. 3 months later, I received an invitation to speak at the Stanford Business School. 200 students attended. Many were immigrants, working-class kids. "Never let anyone make you apologize for where you started," I told them. After, a young man approached me. "Mr. Thorne, I'm working in a kitchen to pay for my engineering degree. People tell me I should be ashamed of service work." "What's your name?" "Aris." "Aris," I said, "the people who look down on honest work are usually the people who've never built anything. You keep building." I handed him my card. "When you graduate, call me. Ethelred is always looking for people who understand work." 6 months later, Aris became our newest junior developer. 2 years later, Elena remarried. His name is David, a software engineer. When she brought him to Sunday dinner, he shook my hand and said, "Mr. Thorne, Elena tells me you built Ethelred from scratch. I'd love to hear about your journey." No assumptions, just curiosity. During dinner, when David asked about my transition from the diner to tech, Elena jumped in. "Dad started with one diner and built it into a $14 billion company. He's one of the most brilliant men in the valley." Her voice carried pride, not apology. Their wedding was smaller, 80 guests. During his toast, David said, "I'm honored to join a legacy built on hard work, integrity, and quiet strength." After dinner, David pulled me aside. "Mr. Thorne, I'm not intimidated by your success. I'm inspired by it." That's the difference. As for Julian Croft, I hear he's doing fine in Arizona, married again. I hope he's learned something. But honestly, I don't think about him anymore. Because the most important lesson from that night wasn't about revenge. It was about knowing your worth, regardless of whether anyone else recognizes it. Respect isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn and lose. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also check out other videos on the channel. Joe's got more interesting stories for you.